I married the crown prince on the same day as Isabella, throwing the strength of my entire clan behind him, all for the sake of becoming empress of the world. Yet the one he made empress was the little eunuch at his side, the girl disguised as a boy. In the end, Isabella, I, and both our families were condemned and destroyed. Given another life, I climbed in through the window of Isabella's bridal chamber and lifted her bridal veil. My gaze burned as I spoke a single line. Rebel, let's join hands and take the world. Chapter 1. Prime Minister Ning's daughter was to marry into the Eastern Palace as crown princess, but the one who came to fetch the bride was the crown prince's personal eunuch. He announced, "The crown princess and secondary consort are entering the Eastern Palace on the same day. Naturally, His Highness has gone to greet the woman he truly loves." In my previous life, it had been exactly the same. The personal eunuch's attitude was insolent. There wasn't a trace of respect for me in his tone. Because he served at the crown prince's side, I tolerated him again and again, and counted every humiliation against Isabella. I blamed her for seducing the crown prince like a fox spirit. Isabella and the crown prince were deeply in love, and she hated that I had used my family's power to rob her of the rightful wife's position. We loathed each other, clashing in open and secret battles. For favor in the Eastern Palace, and for the hope that one day we could rule the Central Palace and extend our family's glory for 100 years. But after we threw in the power of both clans to help the crown prince seize the throne, the one granted the empress's seal was that very little eunuch. No one would ever have imagined that the heir to the throne had hidden his beloved beside him, disguised as a eunuch. We had toiled half our lives, only to pave the way for someone else. Worse still, to prevent us from taking revenge on her, the crown prince framed us with fabricated crimes, wiped out both our families, and slaughtered us to the last. The memory of that past life made the bloodthirsty hatred in my chest hard to suppress. I stared coldly at the little eunuch, lifted my red-painted lips, and ordered, "Kneel." The eunuch's eyes flew wide in disbelief. "I'm the crown prince's favorite. You dare tell me to kneel?" As soon as the words left her mouth, my personal maid Daisy kicked the back of her knee, forcing her down. "You're a rootless eunuch. How dare you shout at Her Highness?" Daisy hadn't held back with that kick. The little eunuch's face went white with pain. But she also understood that, for the moment, she had no power to oppose me, so she could only swallow the humiliation. The more she hurt, the happier I felt. Smiling faintly, I stepped into the bridal sedan. I had just moved against the crown prince's beloved. Naturally, he would not let me off. In front of the assembled palace servants, he picked faults with me. "They say Prime Minister Ning's daughter is well-read and sensible, respectful and gentle, the model daughter of a noble house in the capital. So why is she acting like a shrew today, publicly berating a servant?" The single word shrew was enough to destroy the image I had cultivated for years, and to disgrace the Prime Minister's manner. In my last life, I would long since have bowed my head, admitted fault, and punished myself by copying women's precepts. But in this life, who still cared about such empty reputation? "It's false," I said. "What did you say?" For a moment, the crown prince's expression cracked. I met his eyes calmly and without fear and said, word by word, "The rumors are false. I am not a gentle, kind person. On the contrary, I hate evil as my enemy and cannot tolerate a grain of sand in my eye. So today, I humiliated that little eunuch in public. You!" The crown prince was livid, hating this overbearing way I spoke. Just as the air was about to freeze solid, a soft, boneless hand slid up around his neck. Isabella's melodious voice was as gentle as water, smoothing the mood. "Your Highness, don't be angry. I actually don't think this was Her Highness' fault today." At that, both the crown prince and I were stunned. By all logic, shouldn't Isabella be fanning the flames now, kicking me when I was down? This clearly wasn't the situation he wanted, but Isabella was his publicly acknowledged beloved, so he had to force down his anger and say, "My love, why do you say that? The crown princess is your wife, the one who must share her life with you." Yet that little eunuch openly disrespected the crown princess. "Isn't that the same as stepping on Your Highness' head?" The words, "share her life," made my brow twitch fiercely. Then I heard Isabella add, "If she isn't harshly punished, That eunuch will one day dare to offend her superiors and cause disaster. She might even rebel. With a few light words, Isabella turned that little eunuch into a future traitor and had her rewarded with 20 strokes of the board. The crown prince flung his sleeve in fury and left. Isabella cast me a long, meaningful glance, then followed after him. I stood there staring at her departing back, dazed as a suspicion rose in my mind. Could she have been reborn as well? According to the trajectory of my previous life, the crown prince should have spent the wedding night with Isabella and left me alone in an empty bridal chamber. But now his beloved had just been severely punished. He would go to comfort her. At this moment, Isabella's bridal chamber held only her. I changed into light, close-fitting riding clothes and climbed in through her window like a scoundrel. Isabella was lying lazily on a chaise longue, elbow propped, tossing a grape into her mouth. She said lightly, "Sit wherever," as if she'd known I would come. The instant our eyes met, I knew my guess was right. Isabella had been reborn too. After a long moment, she sat up and asked me, "What are you planning?" "Rebellion," I answered calmly, looking straight into her beautiful eyes. "In our last life, Adrian Yu was unjust. In this life, we'll make ourselves emperor." You. Of all the possibilities Isabella might have imagined, she clearly hadn't expected me to choose the path of rebellion. She came closer and hissed under her breath, "We're two women. Do you really think our families would ever agree?" She was willowy and beautiful, her voice as sweet as an oriole's song. When she leaned in to scold me by my ear, all I could see was the elegant curve of her swan neck, glowing pale under the moonlight. I knew she'd misunderstood. I laid my hand over her flat lower belly and said softly, "What I mean is, you'll bear a child to sit the throne. The two of us will rule from behind the curtain." In our last life, Isabella and I had done nothing but fight. Moments of harmony like this were rare. Faced with this sudden intimacy, we were both a little stunned. With a light smack, Isabella swatted the back of my hand and glared at me. "Don't touch me randomly." She then sprawled back on the chaise longue, glancing at me lazily. "You know very well," she said. "Every time I share a bed with Adrian Yu, he makes me drink abortifacient soup afterward. Where am I supposed to get a child for you?" "It's fine. I'm prepared." I took out a porcelain vial and held it out to her. The bottle was pure white, unremarkable at first glance. But if you looked closely, you'd see plum blossoms carved into the surface with hair-thin lines. In the shifting light, the blossoms seemed almost alive. Isabella shot upright and exclaimed, "Medicine from the Divine Healer's Valley?" "Yes," I nodded. "After I was reborn, I went there to ask for these fertility pills." She was shocked by my foresight. Then something occurred to her and she asked, "So you decided from the start I was the one who'd have your child?" "Yes. And if I hadn't been reborn?" "Keep the child, lose the mother." I calmly spoke the 4 words. Isabella's face went black as the bottom of a pot. She kicked me hard on the backside. "Get out, I don't want to see you again." Isabella's nanny, Nanny Huo, happened to see me just as Isabella kicked me out the door and was horrified. With a bang, the golden basin in her hands fell to the ground. I bent down, picked it up, handed it back to her, and then went back to my own courtyard to wait for Isabella's reply. She did not disappoint. Nanny Huo came with a message. "Your Highness, my mistress says she's willing." In our last life, Isabella had deliberately sent her nanny to bring me a message, just to provoke me and see me lose my composure. As she wished, jealousy burned through me, and I ordered Nanny Huo beaten 10 times. The war between Isabella and me began from there. This life, I summoned Nanny Huo only so she could bring me the signal that things had gone as planned. I was so delighted I couldn't stop smiling. "Daisy, reward her." Daisy immediately took out a brocade pouch filled with gold ingots and handed it respectfully to Nanny Huo. Nanny Huo's brow twitched hard. She had no idea what I was playing at. Forcing down her confusion, she reminded me again in a low voice. "Your Highness? His Highness the Crown Prince has gone to my mistress's quarters." "I know," I replied. "Remember to tell your mistress to make sure her belly is promising, and give me a royal heir soon." "Yes, I will repeat your words to her." Nanny Huo's expression was strange. She gave me a peculiar look and left with the gold. After she left, I lounged on the couch, fingers tapping the armrest as I sank into thought. The medicine I'd gotten from the divine healer's valley could aid conception. If Isabella conceived once, that was fine. But that scum Adrian Yu made her drink abortifacient soup after every time they were together. If that went on, her body would fail sooner or later. How could we avoid that? Just as I was brooding, Daisy came back from seeing Nanny Huo out and whispered, "Your Highness, eunuch James has come." James Lee? I dug through my memories for this man and couldn't help smiling. Quick, invite him in. Sleepy as I was, someone had just brought me a pillow. A timely rain indeed. Adrian Yu's beloved was originally named Rachel Lee. When he had gone to the northwest frontier under imperial order to suppress bandits, he'd been ambushed and thrown off a cliff. Back then, Rachel Lee was just a village doctor from a farming family. She saved him. Just like all the melodramatic cliches in storybooks, Adrian Yu lost his memory and forgot his identity and responsibilities. By the time the Imperial Guards reached that little village beyond the barrier of the frontier mountains, the two of them had already fallen in love through days and nights together. So Rachel Lee followed Adrian Yu back to the capital. But her status was far too low. She wasn't even qualified to be a low-ranking lady in attendance in the Eastern Palace. Adrian Yu wasn't willing to let his beloved be a mere concubine and suffer bullying. So he disguised her as a little eunuch and kept her at his side. That way they could stay together day and night, and she would be safe from harm. The best of both worlds. The two of them were very pleased with this arrangement. But there was one person who grew resentful. Adrian Yu's former chief eunuch, James Lee. When James served at Adrian Yu's side, he was in all his glory. Everyone scrambled to curry favor with him. After Rachel Lee appeared, he was pushed to the margins and gradually faded from Adrian Yu's sight. James Lee came to hate her for it. He schemed to frame her and get rid of her. But when Adrian Yu found out the truth, James Lee was torn apart by 5 horses. By rights, James' crime didn't merit such a punishment. Adrian Yu only did it to kill the chicken and scare the monkeys, making an example of him. As the saying goes, the enemy of my enemy is my friend. How could I not make use of James Lee? He entered and knelt to the floor. "James Lee greets your highness." Clever people didn't need many words. I walked straight up to him and offered an olive branch. "Would you like to regain your former glory?" James Lee understood immediately. He bowed low again, his slightly raised voice full of delight. "I am willing to charge ahead for your highness." I glanced at Daisy. She understood and placed a porcelain bottle before James Lee. "Very good. Then drink this medicine and show me your sincerity." I can't be blamed for being suspicious. People's hearts are hard to read. Today James Lee might throw himself into my camp for the sake of profit, and tomorrow he could betray me for the same reason. I waited quietly for his final decision. He didn't disappoint me. After only a brief hesitation, he popped the stopper and downed the liquid inside like a man cutting off his own hand to survive. Only then did I smile. "Very good. From now on, we're on the same side. As long as you serve me well, I will never treat you badly." "I thank your highness for your favor." After staying only a bit, James Lee left with his first task. I ordered him to find a way to take over the duty of delivering abortifacient soup to Isabella. In secret, he was to switch it to ordinary tonic soup. The task was perilous. A single slip could cost his head. But if he couldn't even manage this, how could I entrust him with greater responsibilities in the future? The board was set. The first move was made. All I could do now was wait for good news. On the second day after the wedding, the crown prince was required to enter the palace with the crown princess to thank the emperor for his grace. Early that morning, I dressed and went straight to the Eastern Palace gate. 2 carriages were already waiting. James Lee stood respectfully by the first. When he saw me, he flicked his eyes toward the back in a discreet signal. I immediately changed course and climbed into the rear carriage. I couldn't wait to ask, "Well, did it work?" Isabella was reclining against the cushions. She lifted her lids lazily to look at me, pointed at her lower belly and snapped, "Come feel it yourself. Am I pregnant or not?" I took her at her word and reached out, startling her into dodging to the side. "You're really going to do it?" she protested. "Why not?" I didn't give her the chance to escape. Instead of touching her belly, my fingers slid to her wrist to feel her pulse. Only when I found everything normal did I breathe out in relief. Then I straightened the clothes she'd rumpled in our scuffle and said, "James Lee is ours now. You can trust him. Even so, you should still have your family send a reliable female doctor. Your foremost task is to give birth to the eldest imperial grandson. I'll handle everything else." Perfect. In this life, I don't want to think. I just want to lie down and win. Isabella accepted my arrangement with admirable cheer. After we sealed our agreement, I rose to get out of the carriage. Just then, Adrian Yu came up to board. We met head-on, his black eyes narrowed. "When did you and Isabella get so close?" he asked. I lifted my gaze to meet his probing look. A wicked impulse rose in me. I spoke half joking, half serious. "Your Highness, you may not know this. My true heart is set on Lady Isabella. I only married you so I could stay by her side forever." Once, there had been an official whose primary wife and concubine grew too close. When he brought colleagues home, they'd stumbled upon the two of them entangled in bed. In a fury, the official had them both drowned in a pig cage. Yet that didn't stop him from becoming the laughingstock of the capital. People teased him. "Are you impotent? If you'd satisfied your wife and concubine, would they really have needed to turn to each other?" To a man, that kind of talk was a direct challenge to his authority as husband, impossible to tolerate. After hearing my words, Adrian Yu exploded, voice low with anger. "Charlotte Ning, don't be so arrogant. Why shouldn't I be? After all, I have a father with great power and status, and you still need to rely on the Prime Minister's manner." Brushing past him, I cast him a sidelong look and said coolly, "Adrian Yu, one day, your women, your children, everything you have will belong to me." Chapter 2. Everything I'd said and done that day was wildly disrespectful, and it was all reported faithfully to the Empress. She only thought I was venting my frustration after being humiliated at my wedding. Not only did she refrain from punishing me, she summoned Adrian Yu and scolded him heavily instead. Then she took my hands affectionately in hers and comforted me. "Charlotte, don't be sad. I recognize only you as my daughter-in-law." The Empress was dignified and composed, her tone kind, like a loving mother-in-law who truly cherished her son's wife. But beneath that smile lay the heart of a venomous serpent. In front of her, I dropped the arrogance I'd shown Adrian Yu. I gently drew my hands back and said, "The Crown Prince is my husband. Whatever he does to me is only natural, but that little eunuch truly doesn't know her place." At that point, I cut myself off at just the right moment, lowering my eyes and looking every bit the wronged, patient wife. "Charlotte, you." "Silence, Crown Prince, you let a lowly eunuch insult the Crown Princess and think you're in the right?" The Empress' tone was harsh. Adrian Yu pressed down his temper and insisted, "Mother, she's not merely an eunuch." I turned my eyes and watched them trade verbal blows. The Empress kept signaling me with her gaze, begging me to smooth things over. Adrian Yu had plenty of arrogance, but not enough brains. In our last life, every task the Empress gave him, to win hearts or steady his position, he took as her attempt to control him. He scorned her advice, even defied her, until mother and son were at daggers drawn. I was always the one playing mediator between them. It won me no gratitude, only Adrian Yu's mockery. This time, I simply ignored it all. With no other choice, the Empress steeled herself and issued a threat. "If you continue to behave like this, don't blame me for being heartless." She leaned down and whispered a few sentences into his ear. Adrian Yu's whole body shuddered. Unwillingly, he bowed his head. "Yes." The Empress was satisfied. Tired, she waved a hand. "You may both go." The Empress sent a nanny to supervise us consummating the marriage. No matter how Adrian Yu resisted, he had no choice but to step into my bedchamber that night. Under the wavering red candles, he drank the tonic the nanny had brought with a face full of disgust. "I feel like a stud hired out by the night," he sneered. Other things had been mixed into that tonic. Not long after he drank it, his face flushed. Desire filled his eyes. Burning with impatience, he lunged to tear at my clothes. Just as he was about to succeed, I slipped back out of reach and mocked him. "I am lowly and unworthy. I dare not defile your highness. Tonight, you'll have to fend for yourself." The Empress's drug was both fast and strong. Desire surged up to Adrian Yu's crown. Eyes blood red, he looked as though he were being burned alive from the inside out. My refusal only stoked his fury. "Charlotte, don't take an inch when I give you a foot," he snarled. What a joke. Hadn't he always trampled my dignity and that of my family under his feet? When had he ever given me face? I found it all very amusing. I gave him a chilly glance and strolled out the door. Daisy hurried up as I emerged and whispered, "Your Highness, the person has been brought." I nodded. "Send her in." Daisy obeyed at once. Inside, when Adrian Yu saw Rachel Lee suddenly appear, he was stunned. "Rachel, why are you here?" Her voice trembled like a sobbing oriole. "Don't you want to see me, Adrian?" "That's not it." He didn't have time to explain before his remaining words were swallowed between her lips. Before long, the sounds coming from inside were enough to make a person blush. The next morning, Rachel Lee emerged with a shy flush. For the first time, she actually bowed to me. As she tugged at her collar, a swath of pale skin and the cluster of ambiguous love bites along her neck were fully exposed as she bent. "I greet your Highness? His Highness is still resting. Your Highness might wish to come a bit later?" There was smugness hidden in her tone. I wasn't sure what she meant to accomplish. Show off silently? Use those marks to flaunt her intimacy with Adrian Yu? Had she forgotten that she was supposed to be a eunuch? If word spread that the heir favored a eunuch, every ambitious eye on the throne would leap to attack. Even if Adrian Yu survived, he'd shed a layer of skin. I ignored her provocation and replied with mild amusement, "Then I'll trouble you, eunuch Rachel, to serve His Highness well." Rachel Lee preened at my praise and said proudly, "That is my duty." Afterward, Adrian Yu palmed off a bloody white handkerchief, stained with Rachel Lee's maiden blood, as proof that he and I had consummated our marriage. The Empress was delighted, saying, "Good," 3 times in a row. "May the two of you quickly bear legitimate children and spread the royal line." Then a stream of rewards flowed into my chambers like water. When Isabella heard about it, she burst in shock. "You really consummated with Adrian Yu?" She demanded an answer, her face full of betrayed rage. I snorted. "Is that even possible?" "Then what happened?" I jerked my chin in a certain direction. Isabella followed my indication and saw an all-too-familiar figure, Rachel Lee. As the Crown Prince's personal eunuch, she was at that moment counting the Empress's rewards. A woman who'd been favored exuded a richer allure. Every move she made had the mature charm of a young married woman. Her slender neck, her graceful figure. Under the loose eunuch's robe there was a body to covet. Watching her, Isabella suddenly laughed. "Idiot." She relaxed all at once and turned back toward me, leaning in until her warm breath brushed my face. Her tone was lightly warning. "Charlotte, now that you've taken the power, the other half of the glory is mine by right." I nodded, promising solemnly, "Don't worry. The future emperor will be a child who crawls out of your belly." Satisfied, Isabella straightened up and returned to her usual playful air. Her pale fingers toyed with a lock of my hair. "Don't make it sound so distant," she said. "He'll be your child, too." She lifted my hand and pressed it to her belly. I could feel the slight swell beneath the layers of cloth. A wave of fierce joy crashed over me. Then Isabella said, "I don't want to share one rotten cucumber with an idiot." In other words, she wanted me to find a way to help her reject Adrian Yu's favor. I nodded and agreed at once. That very day, word spread that Isabella had angered me and been placed under house arrest. Adrian Yu came to question me, all pretense and no heat. He quickly ran up against my cutting insults, stormed away in a rage, and turned his favor on Rachel Lee. In the blink of an eye, nearly a year had passed. On New Year's Eve, the palace hosted a feast and invited officials and their families. Isabella was forgiven, and her ban lifted. Adrian Yu held her in his arms as he escorted her, protecting her carefully. His eyes were ice-cold as he said to me, "Charlotte, Isabella is the one I love. If you dare make a move on her again, even if I have to defy my mother's wishes, I will not spare you." He acted so serious about his warning, eager to declare to the world that Isabella was his treasure, his beloved. Sarcasm flickered in my eyes. My gaze slid past him to rest on Rachel Lee behind him, shifting the disaster eastward. In our previous life, this was the strategy Adrian Yu had used to protect his beloved. Everything he did was to give Rachel Lee a sense of safety, so that she would be of one mind with him and cooperate flawlessly. Later, after she became empress, she had once deigned to visit our cold palace in her splendorous phoenix robes. Looking down at Isabella and me, she laughed. "You didn't expect this, did you?" While you two tore at each other like clam and snipe, I was the fisherman who walked away with the catch. This life? It wouldn't go so smoothly. With me advising from the shadows, James Lee regained Adrian Yu's trust. James was seasoned and smooth, ultimately far more useful. Adrian Yu began entrusting him with the delicate tasks once given to Rachel Lee. Because of that, she no longer followed him step for step, as in our last life. And with James Lee often whispering in her ear about how Adrian Yu had pampered Isabella before he'd ever met Rachel. Childhood sweethearts inseparable as children. A youthful pledge to marry for life. Even knowing it was a lie, Rachel Lee still burned with jealousy. After warning me, Adrian Yu took Isabella into the carriage. Rachel Lee stared at their retreating backs, her eyes dark. As I passed her, I sighed as if without thinking. Isabella has what every woman in the world dreams of, a husband's open, unapologetic favor and protection. After all, who would bear to see his beloved skulk about like a sewer rat that can't see the light of day? Isn't that so, eunuch Rachel? Rachel Lee's face went corpse white. Her hands clenched tight. 12. Because of palace rules, Adrian Yu had no choice but to sit beside me at the feast. Perhaps because it was New Year's, the usually stern emperor suddenly sounded like any ordinary father as he began to press for an heir. He said, "The Prime Minister's daughter is the very image of poise and restraint, with the refinement of the scholar's grove. Crown Prince, you're not young anymore. It's time you had a legitimate son or daughter." In the mouths of every noble, I was flawless to a fault. From the time Adrian Yu was old enough to understand, everyone had been sending him the same message. It was his great fortune to marry me. He loathed that feeling. To have a woman overshadow him was humiliation. His face darkened. He was just about to retort when a retching sound cut him off. I turned back to see Rachel Lee kneeling behind him, gagging in discomfort. Such loss of decorum before the throne. For a long second, everyone froze in shock, until the Empress was the first to react and snapped. "Bold eunuch. Drag that wretch out and beat her to death with the rod. Don't soil His Majesty's eyes." At the words, "beat her to death," Rachel Lee turned paper pale. She forgot herself and cried out, "Adrian." Those 3 words, Adrian Yu and Isabella could say them. But never a eunuch. The Empress trembled with rage. "What are you waiting for? Drag her out! Drag her out!" "Mother." Adrian Yu stepped in front of Rachel Lee, almost pleading. But just as the guards were about to haul her away, the imperial consort seated below the Empress suddenly raised her voice. "Why does it look to me," she drawled, "like this eunuch is suffering morning sickness?" "You're talking nonsense," the Empress snapped. The imperial consort, favored above all others, loved nothing more than to make the Empress's life difficult. While everyone else held their breath, wishing they could disappear into thin air, she continued to fan the flames. "I'm not speaking nonsense. I've borne 2 daughters and a son. No one knows the signs of pregnancy better than I." The moment the words left her mouth, the hall was in an uproar. A eunuch? Pregnant? Impossible. On the high dais, the Emperor's face darkened like storm clouds. Adrian Yu's complexion turned ashen. Only Rachel Lee, shaking with fear, also held a spark of reckless hope in her eyes. She wanted to use this chance to walk openly to Adrian Yu's side. The Empress's gaze flitted around the hall before suddenly landing on me. "Crown Princess," she asked, "what do you say?" At once, Adrian Yu also looked to me, eyes full of desperate hope. My father was the Emperor's most trusted minister. As long as I spoke up, His Majesty would surely give him face and smooth the matter over. At least he wouldn't let things become so ugly. But I couldn't wait for the scandal to shake the world. Under the Emperor's simmering glare, I bowed low. "Your Majesty, summon an imperial physician, then the truth will be clear." The imperial physician finished taking her pulse and dropped to his knees, trembling as he reported, "Your Majesty, this eunuch does indeed have a joyful pulse. She is more than a month along." Then he pressed his forehead to the floor, braced to bear the Emperor's wrath. The great hall fell into dead silence. Only the imperial consort's tinkling laugh rang out at the worst possible time. "Your Majesty, you see? I was right. She's pregnant." "Allow me to congratulate Your Majesty first. You're going to be a grandmother." "But how strange, a eunuch pregnant. Truly, the world is full of wonders." "Enough." The Emperor slammed the table. "Guards, drag this eunuch who has brought chaos into the inner palace out. beat her to death with the rod. Rachel Lee had been waiting, thrilled, for her moment to ascend. At those words, she panicked completely. "Adrian, save me," she cried. "Save me, I'm carrying your child." Adrian Yu looked at her as she was dragged away, then clenched his teeth and burst out, "Father!" "Rachel isn't a eunuch," he said. "She's the woman your son loves." The emperor fixed his gaze on him. "Crown Prince, are you certain?" "I am certain," Adrian Yu said. "I beg Father to grant mercy and spare Rachel and the child in her womb." The emperor's eyes were full of disappointment as he waved a limp hand. "Enough. I truly can't manage you anymore." "Rachel, Adrian?" The two of them clung to each other, weeping with joy at their brush with death. Rachel Lee clutched Adrian Yu's robes, her eyes bright with happiness and relief. Sadly, the reality awaiting her was far from so simple. The emperor might spare her life, but the empress was still there, waiting to settle the account in her own time. Afterward, the empress summoned me to Phoenix Hall to demand an explanation. "Charlotte, are you planning a rebellion?" I met her furious glare head-on, not a flicker of fear in me. "You saw it too, Mother," I said. "The crown prince is drowning in romance, indecisive, and unfit for great responsibility. After this incident, in Father's mind he has," lips curving slightly, I spoke the two words she least wanted to hear, "fallen from favor." Her pupils shrank sharply. Then she burst into rage. "And what of that? Your marriage to the crown prince is sealed. Can the Ning family possibly choose a new master?" "Of course not," I shook my head. "But your Majesty's own family is in decline. Instead of pinning your hopes on the crown prince's accession, have you never considered setting up a young heir?" She hesitated. "What do you mean?" Smiling, I dropped into a formal bow of congratulations. "Allow me to congratulate Mother on becoming a grandmother. Lady Isabella has been pregnant for more than 4 months. When the imperial grandson is born, he will be registered under my name as the legitimate eldest imperial grandson." Compared to trying to prop up a hopeless, rotten plank, a newborn heir was full of limitless possibility. Besides, no matter what, if Adrian Yu ascended the throne, he would always keep her under his thumb. How could that compare to the ease of ruling through a child? Until he came of age and took the reins, they could rule from behind the curtain and hold the court in their palms. Our two families would enjoy unprecedented glory. Thoughts flickered rapid fire through the Empress' mind. She understood in an instant. After a long silence, she said, "Prime Minister Ning's daughter is indeed no creature for a small pond. For one such as you, being born a woman is almost an injustice. I'll give you this chance. Don't let me down." "Thank you for your Majesty's trust." I left Phoenix Hall in perfect composure, the brocade pouch at my waist swaying as I walked. Rachel Lee had thrown up at the feast because of the scent clinging to that pouch. Chapter 3. The next day, the Empress sent a wave of rewards and instructed Rachel Lee to dress herself up well to enter the palace with me in the afternoon. Rachel bathed, perfumed herself, and put on makeup. In the end, she chose the most sumptuous red brocade dress from the Empress's gifts. Looking at her transformed reflection in the mirror, she was quite pleased with herself. "Charlotte, what does it matter if you were born to the Prime Minister's manor?" she said smugly. "With Adrian's love, Her Majesty will have to accept me for his sake." Lowering my eyes, I noticed the phoenix embroidered in gold thread at her hem, and couldn't help but laugh. Rachel Lee was still too green. She had no idea how deep the waters of the harem ran. Suddenly, my mood improved. I even found the leisure to encourage my enemy from a past life. "Good luck," I said. I led her to Phoenix Hall. As usual, I greeted the Empress with a proper curtsy. Rachel tried to imitate my bow. She had only just bent her knees when the chief palace matron at the Empress's side snapped. "Bold wench, to dare secretly embroider a phoenix on your dress. Do you mean to take Her Majesty's place?" Rachel flinched and instinctively protested. "No, this was bestowed on me by Her Majesty herself." "Insolent." She didn't get to finish the sentence before the matron slapped her across the face. Rachel was frail and delicate. The force of it sent her sprawling. She clapped a hand to her reddening cheek, stunned and unable to process what had just happened. On the throne, the Empress remained stone still. With so little sense of decorum, how could she possibly serve the Crown Prince well? She said flatly. "Nanny Ram, take her down and teach her the rules." "Yes, Your Majesty." The chief matron dipped a little curtsy and led the still dazed Rachel away. The empress then kept me behind to give me a few mild warnings before dismissing me as well. When I left Phoenix Hall, Adrian Yu was already waiting anxiously at the Eastern Palace gate. Seeing that no one followed behind me, he blurted, "Where is Rachel?" I repeated the empress's words to him. Her Majesty said, "Miss Li is lacking in propriety and might not be fit to serve your highness, so she has kept her at Phoenix Hall to learn the rules." Rage rushed to his face. He grabbed my collar and hissed, "Charlotte, Ning, do you really think I don't dare kill you?" To me now, Adrian Yu was nothing but a paper tiger. If he weren't still useful, I'd have had him quietly assassinated long ago. I chuckled. "Your Highness," I said, "before you boast, I suggest you weigh your own position." The emperor had never been entirely satisfied with Adrian Yu as his heir. If not for his birthright as the eldest legitimate son, if not for the fact that his two fathers-in-law were Prime Minister Ning and the commander of the three armies, with the messes he'd already made, his enemies would have long since torn him to pieces. Meeting his murderous glare, I continued at an unhurried pace. "If you want to keep your title as Crown Prince, you'd best mind your tone with me." His shoulders slumped. He let go of me and shot me one last poisonous look before staggering off toward Phoenix Hall. 16. I knew he was going to ask the Empress for Rachel. Anyone could guess with a toe that it would be useless. Yet whatever the Empress said to him, when he returned, he seemed a different man. He gazed at me with manufactured tenderness. "Charlotte," he said, "I was wrong in the past. I will treat you well from now on." I was puzzled. "Your Highness, did you go mad?" He shook his head. "I've just suddenly realized you're the one I should cherish." From then on, he accompanied me for all 3 daily meals. Whenever I visited my parents' home, he prepared generous gifts. He couldn't stop praising me in public, talking about the Crown Princess every 3 sentences. Soon, everyone in the palace was saying the Crown Prince had finally come to his senses. Isabella? A passing fancy. The lady, eunuch? Even more so. The Crown Princess was his true love. But the unease in my heart only grew. So on a fine, cloudless day, I found a pretext to punish Isabella again. When Adrian Yu heard, he only said calmly, "Charlotte, you are mistress of the Eastern Palace. If you wish to punish someone, you needn't ask me." Thus, with her belly heavy and round, Isabella was unceremoniously sent off by me to Cold Mountain Temple. On the day she left the capital city, eyes brimming with tears, she confronted me. "Have you been blinded by Adrian Yu's affection? Is that why you're getting rid of me like a stumbling block? You tricked me into having a child for you, and now you're killing the donkey after it's done grinding. You deceitful, heartless woman." Ever since she became pregnant, Isabella's temperament had grown erratic. What she was saying now had no basis at all. I couldn't help but laugh, but I forced my patience and coaxed her. "Be good. Just rest at Cold Mountain Temple for a while. When the time is right, I'll bring you back." Half doubtful, she went. Adrian Yu's sudden show of weakness won my father's full support. Relying on my memories from the previous life, I used my foresight to advise him, helping him rack up notable merits. Again and again the emperor praised him in court. More and more waverers from the neutral faction began to lean his way. It was as if the scandal of him impregnating a eunuch and disgracing the royal house had never happened. As if his position as crown prince was utterly secure. Unfortunately, Adrian Yu's skills were still too shallow. He could only pretend to be a loving husband with me for a few months before his act fell apart. He started going to Phoenix Hall constantly under the pretense of filial piety. Whether he was visiting the Empress or Rachel Li was anyone's guess. Isabella's due date drew near. To keep her from overthinking, I packed up a week early and moved into Cold Mountain Temple to stay with her. She went into labor on a clear, star-scattered night at the turn of summer to autumn. The night wind was cool. After a full day and night of battle, Isabella finally gave birth safely to twins, a boy and a girl. I sat by her bed, wiping the sweat from her face. "You've worked hard," I said. She was exhausted. Just managing one glance at the children drained the last of her strength. Before she passed out, she whispered, "Charlotte, I've had the children. If you don't succeed, I'll skin you alive." How could I fail? In our last life, the Ning and Huo families had been wiped out together. Isabella and I had both died wretchedly. Every drop of that blood debt had to be repaid. On the second day after the imperial grandchildren were born, I returned to the palace to bring the empress the good news. She studied me for a long time, her expression an unreadable mix of joy and annoyance. "Charlotte, you truly have skill," she said. "Isabella, whose interests conflict with yours, and you still coaxed her into serving your ends." It sounded half like praise, half like mockery. I ignored it and said only, "By now, Rachel Lee should be about 7 or 8 months along, shouldn't she? I wonder if she's still well in Mother's hands?" The Empress' face changed. She sat up straighter. "What are you planning to do?" From my wide sleeve, I drew out a thick stack of documents, proof of crimes committed by the Empress' own family. One by one, each offense merited extermination of 9 clans. "Enough," she snapped. I stopped and looked up at her. She swallowed her fury and asked through gritted teeth, "Charlotte, what exactly do you want?" "Only Isabella may bear heirs for the crown prince," I said. This was the promise I'd given Isabella, and the reason the Huo family backed me so firmly. In this world, no bond was stronger than that forged by shared interests. The Empress took a long, deep breath. She made one last attempt to plead for Rachel Lee. "You're the crown princess. If you harm the crown prince's child, he'll have a reason to depose you." "That's why it would be best for your majesty to act," I replied calmly. The Empress fell silent. At last, in a voice heavy with pain, she gave the order. "Go. Beat Rachel Lee to death with the rod." As soon as the words left her mouth, she closed her eyes. She understood with perfect clarity that with this decree, her bond as mother and son with the crown prince was truly finished. To beat a pregnant woman to death, what a cruel act! Yet I stood in the courtyard without blinking, watching the rod fall again and again on Rachel Lee's body. During her months at Phoenix Hall, she had enjoyed special treatment, well-fed and pampered until she was plump and round. Now her mouth was stuffed with cloth. She was in agony, but not even allowed to cry out. By the time Adrian Yu arrived, crimson blood had already spread across the floor. Rachel Lee lay in the center of that pool, her fate uncertain. "Mother!" he cried to the regal woman on the main seat. The Empress wavered. I lifted my eyes and reminded her softly, "Your Majesty must weigh which is more important, the entire An family or one so-called eunuch." At that, the Empress' movement stalled. Her hand, half raised, fell back to the chair's armrest. "Continue," she ordered. "Rachel, Rachel, Rachel." Adrian Yu's voice broke as he called her name over and over. He wanted to go to her, but the guards held him fast. He could only watch helplessly as his beloved was beaten to death. Did it hurt? "Adrian Yu, when you used the An family and then discarded them, when you had my parents' and brother's family killed, I hurt just the same." After Rachel Lee's death, Adrian Yu gathered her body into his arms and carried her away, his back desolate. The Empress let out a long, shuddering breath. "You can give those documents to me now, can't you?" she asked. I handed them over. She threw them straight into the brazier and watched them burn to ash before her heart settled. Then her face twisted into something ugly as she warned me, "Charlotte, don't let me catch you making a mistake. I won't spare you." I looked back unflinchingly. "Your Majesty can barely protect herself now," I said. "There's no need to worry about me." She stiffened. "What do you mean?" "Imperial edict." The shrill voice of the chief eunuch carried down the corridor into Phoenix Hall. A moment later, the eunuch at the Emperor's side recited His Majesty's decree. The Empress had repeatedly harmed imperial heirs. Her virtue no longer matched her station. She was to be deposed and granted death. Before he finished, the Empress slapped the scroll away. "Impossible," she cried. "I demand to see His Majesty." "Sister, you should give up," a silken voice chimed in. The imperial consort entered in full splendor, picking up the fallen edict. She placed it back into the Empress's hand and closed her fingers around it. "If you're leaving," she said with a soft smile that belied her words, "I'll see you off." The Empress breathed hard, her gaze whipping between me and the imperial consort. Suddenly it clicked, and she jabbed a finger at me. "Charlotte, you poisonous woman, you actually joined hands with the imperial consort to destroy me." I said calmly, "How can this be called destroying you?" "You did, in fact, kill 2 daughters and a son of Her Majesty the imperial consort. That is beyond dispute. In a single night, Adrian Yu lost both his beloved and his mother. He knelt outside the palace of heavenly purity for the entire night, but still could not persuade the emperor to change his mind. When he returned, he was gaunt and haggard. Suddenly he grabbed me in a fierce embrace and said hoarsely, "Charlotte, I have no mother now." If his hands hadn't been clamped on my arms with trembling force, I might almost have believed he no longer hated me. Acting, after all, was something anyone could do. I wrapped my arms around him in return, patting his back gently. "Do not grieve, Your Highness," I whispered. "You still have me." Right now, Adrian Yu truly was in dire straits. The other princes' factions were watching like wolves. Even the emperor, because of the empress, had lost any real fondness for him. I taught him a tactic, cutting off his tail to survive. Adrian Yu personally presented evidence that would see the An family executed to the emperor. His Majesty read it in silence for a long time before asking, "If the An family falls, you'll have no support at all." Adrian Yu straightened his back. At the emperor's words, he fell to his knees, pressing his forehead to the cold floor as he answered with righteous conviction, "Your son is crown prince first, An family nephew second." When a prince breaks the law, he is punished like a commoner. Before today, your son did not know the depth of mother and his uncle's crimes. Now that I do, I have no reason to cover for them. The emperor gave a faint grunt but did not immediately order the An family dealt with. He simply waved Adrian Yu away. For a long time afterward, Adrian Yu remained sick and locked himself away. A month later, the emperor finally issued his decree. The entire An family was to be executed. Other princes tried to use this chance to bring him down and force the crown prince's deposition. But my father's eloquence in court dismantled their attacks one by one. By this point, Adrian Yu was completely isolated, no allies, no power. He had become a puppet at my mercy. But that still wasn't enough. Just then, the kingdom of Li invaded. The frontier was in crisis. I placed a piece on the chessboard and instructed Isabella, "You will accompany Adrian Yu to the western borderlands and help him seize control of the military." 5 years later, under my tutelage, the eldest imperial grandson had grown into a proper young gentleman. I often brought him into the palace. Quick-witted and charming, he pleased the emperor immensely. Prime Minister Ning raised a daughter as graceful as an orchid. The emperor would say, "And now the crown princess has raised an eldest imperial grandson with the same bearing the prime minister had in his youth." Reclining on his couch, the emperor now clearly showed the frailty of an old dragon. He coughed into his fist, each vibration rattling his chest as if it might break him. A palace maid brought tea to rinse his mouth. At last, he sighed in weary resignation. "I truly am old now." Everyone lowered their heads, not daring to make a sound. Just then, my grandson hitched up his robe and climbed onto the dragon bed, his soft little hand covering the emperor's veiny one. "Grandfather Emperor will live 10,000 years, he said in his babyish voice. The emperor started in surprise, then burst into hearty laughter. The heavy air in the hall vanished in an instant. After his mirth faded, he said, "The war in the western borderlands is nearly done. You and the crown prince have been apart for so many years. Now it seems you've finally seen the clouds part and the moon shine through." Yes. After 6 years of laying out my plans, it was finally time to close the net. While Adrian Yu fought on the frontier, I hadn't been idle in the capital city. Aside from raising the eldest imperial grandson, I'd worked step by step to dismantle every other prince's faction, ensuring no rival power remained to block Adrian Yu's return to claim the throne. After Adrian Yu returned victorious, the emperor's illness worsened until he could no longer rise from his bed. The crown prince personally watched over him at the Palace of Heavenly Purity. When the emperor finally passed, his dying edict ordered Adrian Yu to assume the throne at once. After the funeral, memorials flooded Adrian Yu's desk like snow, all of them urging him to elevate me to empress. That day, I had just coaxed the eldest imperial grandson to sleep. Adrian Yu barged in, flung a folded memorial at my face, and shouted. I didn't dodge in time. The sharp corner of the paper cut my forehead and drew a line of blood. I didn't cry out. I only looked at him calmly. "What does your majesty mean by this?" "Charlotte, isn't this what you did it all for?" he snarled. "To become empress? Well, I refuse. I'll have you cut into 1,000 pieces and buried with Rachel, he laughed, giddy with the intoxication of having finally risen above everyone. In his mind, he must have already seen me die miserably. I found him ridiculous. Is it possible, I asked mildly, that I don't want to be empress? That I only want to be the empress dowager? His laughter cut off. Fear washed over his face. What do you mean? He whispered. I smiled. From my sleeve I drew a dagger. Taking advantage of his guard being down, I stabbed him. There was a soft sound as the blades sank into flesh. Blood welled at the corner of Adrian Yu's mouth. He stared down in disbelief as I slowly pushed the dagger into his chest. You dare commit regicide, he choked. Don't talk nonsense, I corrected him. His Majesty was gravely wounded after years at war. His old injuries flared up. He needs to rest in bed. I had soaked the blade in a numbing decoction all night. Even an elephant would have toppled after that. Once the hilt met flesh, I yanked the dagger free in one smooth motion. Adrian Yu crashed to the floor. James Lee, waiting outside, rushed in at the noise. Your Majesty, he breathed. Unruffled, I wiped the blood from the dagger. His Majesty has fallen asleep, I said. Take him back to his chambers to rest. James glanced down at Adrian Yu's chest, at the blood pouring out. The corner of his mouth twitched. Yes, he said respectfully. A month later, Adrian Yu succumbed to his old wounds and died. On his deathbed, he left an imperial edict naming the eldest imperial grandson as his successor. He granted his legitimate mother, Charlotte, the title of Mother Empress Dowager, and biological mother Isabella Huo, the title of Holy Empress Dowager. Until the new emperor came of age to rule in his own right, the Mother Empress Dowager would govern from behind a curtain, with Prime Minister Ning and General Huo assisting in regency.